Just got discharged from the hospital. Doctor said I can't walk yet. Can you pick me up when you have time? I sent the text to my son Michael while the nurse wheeled me toward the exit. His response came back faster than I'd hoped. My wife said we can't keep dropping everything for you every time. Just call an Uber. When they found out who picked me up instead, it would change their lives for the worst. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how a simple phone call became the most satisfying revenge I never knew I needed. My name is Dorothy Parker, Dot to most people, and at 65, I thought I'd seen every flavor of family disappointment. I was wrong. 3 days earlier, I'd been rushed to Phoenix General with what felt like someone taking a blowtorch to my gallbladder. Emergency surgery, they said. Nothing too serious, but recovery would take weeks. The whole time I was in that hospital bed, watching terrible daytime TV and eating food that tasted like cardboard, I kept expecting Michael to visit. Maybe bring the grandkids. Sarah, my daughter-in-law, had been so concerned when I called about the pain. "Oh my goodness, Dot. You need to get to the hospital right away," she'd said, her voice dripping with what I thought was genuine worry. "Michael and I will meet you there." They never showed. For 3 days, I told myself they were busy. Michael's insurance business was demanding, and Sarah had her hands full with the kids. I made excuses like I'd been doing for the past 2 years, ever since they'd moved into that oversized house they couldn't quite afford. But sitting in that hospital wheelchair, staring at Michael's text message, something inside me finally snapped. Not broken, clarified. Like suddenly putting on reading glasses and seeing the fine print you'd been missing all along. I called a cab instead of Uber. Seemed more reliable for a post-surgery ride. 20 minutes later, a well-dressed man in his early 60s approached my wheelchair. Not my cab driver. "Mrs. Dorothy Parker?" His voice was warm but professional. "My name is Robert Hamilton. I'm from Regional Southwest Financial, and we need to talk." I should have been alarmed. Instead, I found myself oddly calm. Maybe it was the pain medication, or maybe I was just too emotionally drained to care anymore. "If this is about Michael's mortgage, Mr. Hamilton, I'm afraid I'm not in a position to help right now." His expression shifted to something resembling surprise. "Actually, Mrs. Parker, I think you'll find it's quite the opposite." "I don't understand," I said, as Robert Hamilton helped me into his car, a modest Toyota that screamed responsible bank employee rather than flashy wealth. "Are you here in some official capacity?" "I'm a regional manager at the bank that holds your son's mortgage," Robert said, starting the engine. "And over the past several months, Michael has been telling us some very interesting stories about his family situation." My blood chilled. "What kind of stories?" "Stories about supporting his elderly mother through extensive medical expenses. Claims that you've been a significant financial burden due to progressive health issues." Robert glanced at me as we stopped at a red light. "According to Michael, you've been unable to care for yourself and have been draining his resources." I stared at him in disbelief. "That's completely untrue." "I know." His voice was gentle but firm. "Because I've been investigating his hardship application for loan modification. Your son has provided documentation claiming that monthly payments to you for medical care and assisted living considerations are why he's fallen behind on his mortgage." "Payments to me?" My voice came out as a squeak. Except the bank statements he provided show payments from you to him, consistently, for over 2 years. Robert pulled into a small park and cut the engine. "Mrs. Parker, your son has been using your generosity as evidence of his hardship while actually defaulting on a loan you don't even know you're responsible for." The world tilted sideways. "Responsible for? You co-signed Michael's mortgage application 2 years ago. He told you it was just a character reference, didn't he?" Robert's expression was sympathetic. "But you actually signed as a co-borrower. If he defaults, you're equally liable for the debt." I closed my eyes, remembering that day at the bank. Michael had been so excited, so grateful for my help. He'd rushed me through the paperwork, explaining that the bank just needed someone to vouch for him. I'd been proud to help my son achieve home ownership. "How much?" I whispered. "Current balance is $344,000 with late fees and penalties." I opened my eyes to find Robert studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Mr. Hamilton, why are you telling me this personally? Isn't this something that should be handled through official channels?" Something flickered across his face. an emotion I couldn't identify, because fraud cases involving elder abuse deserve personal attention, and because he paused, seeming to struggle with his words, because something about your name seemed familiar, and I wanted to meet you myself. Familiar how? Robert was quiet for a long moment, staring out at families playing in the park. Mrs. Parker, what was your maiden name? Sullivan, I answered automatically. Dorothy Sullivan. Why? The change in his expression was immediate and profound. Color drained from his face, and his hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. Bobby? I whispered, the impossible recognition hitting me like lightning. Hello, Dot? Robert's voice was barely audible. Voice. I've been looking for you for 45 years. The summer of 1980 crashed over me like a tidal wave. Bobby Hamilton, half Irish, half Italian, with dreams of changing the world and promises that stretched beyond the horizons of our small Ohio town. The boy I was supposed to meet at Union Station. The man I'd planned to marry. You changed your name, I managed. Hamilton was my stepfather's name. I started using it after... He swallowed hard. After you didn't show up that morning. I did show up. Tears were streaming down my face now. I waited for 3 days. My parents told me you'd gotten the job in San Francisco and decided you didn't want a small-town girl holding you back. Robert turned to face me fully, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Your father came to see me in Cleveland 6 months later, told me you'd married someone else, that you were pregnant with another man's child, said you wanted me to leave you alone. They lied. The words came out broken. They lied to both of us. 45 years, Robert said softly. 45 years of wondering what I did wrong, what I could have said differently. I reached across the console and took his hand, the same gentle hands that used to hold mine during those long walks by the lake. I married Dante because I thought you'd abandoned me, because my parents convinced me you never loved me at all. I never stopped loving you, he whispered. Even after I married someone else, even after my divorce, even after all these years, I never stopped wondering about the girl with the laugh like wind chimes who was supposed to change my life. We sat in that car for 20 minutes, crying and talking and trying to process 4 decades of lost time. Finally, Robert pulled himself together enough to return to the business at hand. Dot, I need you to understand something. When I saw Dorothy Parker in Michael's file and noticed your former address was listed as Ohio, I started wondering. When I saw Sullivan as your maiden name in the background check, I knew I had to meet you. His voice grew stronger. But regardless of our history, what your son has done is serious fraud. He's not just lying to the bank. He's set you up to take the fall for his debts. What exactly has he done? He's 3 months behind on mortgage payments. He's applied for loan modification claiming financial hardship due to caring for his incompetent mother. He's provided falsified medical records stating you have dementia and require full-time care. Robert's voice turned professional again. And he's used your actual bank statements as proof of his expenses, labeling your support payments to him as care payments from you. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. So when I paid his mortgage, it became expensive home modifications for your disability needs. When you bought groceries for them, it became specialized dietary requirements for your health conditions. Robert squeezed my hand. He's turned your love into evidence of your incompetence. What happens now? Robert's smile was grim. Now we give him exactly what he's been asking for, a visit from his incompetent mother. The next morning, I stood in Robert's bank office, watching my son through a conference room window as he spread documents across the table. Michael looked confident, almost cocky, as he gestured animatedly to the loan officer taking notes. 26 minutes of complete fiction so far, Robert murmured beside me. He's currently explaining how your progressive dementia requires round-the-clock supervision. I almost laughed. Yesterday, after our emotional reunion, Robert and I had spent hours walking through the downtown district, talking about our lost years and catching up on our separate lives. This morning, I'd done my usual yoga routine and cooked breakfast for both of us. Some dementia. Are you ready for this, Dot? I straightened my shoulders and smoothed my dress. I've been ready for this conversation for 2 years. I just didn't know it. Robert opened the conference room door. Michael, I'd like you to meet someone. The look on my son's face was worth every moment of yesterday's shock and tears. His mouth literally fell open, and the papers in his hands scattered to the floor. "Mom? What are you? How did you? Hello? Sweetheart." I settled into the chair across from him with deliberate calm. "Don't let me interrupt. I was just hearing about my progressive dementia. Please, continue." Michael's face cycled through confusion, panic, and desperate calculation. "I can explain." "Oh, good," Robert said, closing the door behind him. "Because I'm very interested in explanations, particularly about these medical bills." He placed a folder on the table and opened it to reveal copies of checks. "My checks. Would you like to explain to your mother how her mortgage payments became her medical expenses?" Michael recovered quickly. I had to give him credit for that. He shifted into the concerned son routine with practiced ease. "Mom, you don't understand the situation," he said, reaching across the table toward my hand. I pulled back. "I've been trying to protect you from the stress of our financial problems. Yes, I used some of your support as documentation, but only because the bank needed proof of our hardship." "Hardship caused by caring for me?" I asked sweetly. "It's not like that, Michael." Robert's voice cut through my son's stammering. "You submitted a loan modification application claiming your mother requires full-time care due to progressive dementia and mobility issues. You provided medical records stating she's been hospitalized 6 times this year for complications related to her condition." The blood drained from Michael's face. "Those aren't falsified. Mrs. Parker," Robert continued, "would you like to tell your son what you did yesterday afternoon?" I smiled at Michael's increasingly desperate expression. "Well, after our conversation, I walked 3 miles through downtown Phoenix with Mr. Hamilton here. Then I cooked dinner for both of us and spent the evening discussing literature and banking regulations." I paused for effect. "After that, I drove myself back to my apartment complex and took my usual evening walk around the neighborhood." Michael's mouth opened and closed silently. "Tell me, son," I continued, "exactly which part of that sounds like someone who needs full-time care for dementia?" "This is all a misunderstanding," Michael said, but his voice lacked conviction now. "Mom, you know I would never intentionally. Sarah and I have been so worried about you." "Really?" I leaned back in my chair. "Because when I texted asking for a ride home from surgery, your immediate response was to tell me to call an Uber. That doesn't sound like someone worried about their mother's well-being." Robert opened another folder. "Michael, I have here your original loan application from 2 years ago. Your stated income was $78,000 annually. Your debt-to-income ratio was already at the maximum we typically approve." He looked up. "You qualified for this loan only because your mother co-signed." My head snapped toward Michael. "You told me I was just a character reference." "Mom, not a character reference, Michael. A co-signer. You said the bank just needed someone to vouch for your reliability." My voice was rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Are you telling me I've been legally responsible for this debt all along?" Robert nodded gravely. "Mrs. Parker, you're equally liable for this mortgage. When Michael defaults, the bank can pursue you for the full amount." The room spun slightly. "And what happens if I can't pay?" "Foreclosure proceedings against both of you. Garnishment of assets, including your retirement accounts and your current home." I stared at my son, this stranger wearing Michael's face who had put my financial security at risk without my knowledge or consent. "You made me responsible for a debt that could destroy my retirement, then lied to the bank about why you can't pay it." "It was supposed to be temporary," Michael said weakly. "Just until the business picked up. 2 years, Michael. 2 years of lies while I sent you money thinking I was helping family." I stood up, needing distance from him. "And now, you want the bank to believe I'm incompetent so you can modify the terms of a loan you tricked me into co-signing." Robert cleared his throat. "There's more, Mrs. Parker. The falsified medical records Michael submitted constitute bank fraud. Given that this involves a federally insured institution, we're looking at federal charges." Michael went white. "Federal charges? Bank fraud, falsification of documents, elder financial abuse." Robert counted off on his fingers. "The penalties are quite severe, especially when they involve exploitation of senior citizens." I watched my son realize the magnitude of his situation. The cocky confidence was gone, replaced by raw terror. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to fix this the way I'd fixed his childhood problems. But the larger part, The part that had been used and lied to for years felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. Power. "Mr. Hamilton," I said slowly, "what are my options here?" "Well," Robert said, "that depends on how cooperative everyone wants to be." Michael looked between us with growing desperation. "What does that mean?" I met my son's eyes and smiled. For the first time in years, I held all the cards. "It means, sweetheart, that your life is about to change dramatically. And this time, I'm the one making the decisions." The phone started ringing at 6 a.m. the next morning. Sarah's name flashed on my screen, but I let it go to voicemail. Then again at 6:15 and 6:30. By the fourth call, I finally answered. Thank God!" Sarah's voice was breathless with panic. "We need to talk. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "Has there?" I sat up in bed, surprisingly well-rested for someone whose world had been turned upside down 2 days ago. Michael told me what happened at the bank. That man, that Mr.
Hamilton, he's obviously confused about the documentation. We can fix this. I almost laughed. Even now, Sarah was trying to manage the narrative. "Sarah, dear, I was there. I heard every word Michael said. There's no confusion. But you don't understand the pressure we've been under." Her voice cracked with practiced emotion.
"Michael's business has been struggling, my maternity leave used up our savings, and he was just trying to buy us time. By committing fraud and making me an unwitting accomplice." Silence stretched between us before Sarah tried a different approach. "Look, we know you're upset, but think about Emma and Jake. Do you really want their father to face criminal charges? They need stability, Dot. They need their family intact." There it was, the manipulation I'd been blind to for years. Use the grandchildren as leverage, appeal to my grandmother's heart. It might have worked a week ago. "Sarah," I said calmly, "where are the children right now?" They're at my mother's house, just until we sort this out." "Smart move, getting them away before the lawyers arrive." I heard her sharp intake of breath. "Because that's what's happening today, isn't it? Michael's scrambling to find legal representation. How did you—" "Dot, we're family. We stick together through tough times." "Funny thing about family," I said, walking to my kitchen to start coffee. "I thought that meant honesty, respect, and not using your mother as collateral for criminal activity." I paused. "Tell Michael I'll be at the house at 2 o'clock this afternoon. We need to discuss my options." "Your options?" Mr. Hamilton was very enlightening about what cooperation might look like. Apparently, the bank is willing to consider alternatives to prosecution under certain circumstances. I hung up and immediately called Robert. "Good morning, Dot." His voice was warm with affection that made my heart skip. "I trust you slept well." "Better than I have in months." Sarah just called with the predictable damage control script. I settled into my favorite chair. "They want to meet this afternoon." "Perfect. Are you ready for Phase 2? "What exactly is Phase 2? "We teach your son what consequences actually look like." I could hear the satisfaction in Robert's voice. "And maybe, if we're lucky, we save his marriage and his children's stability in the process." At exactly 2 o'clock, I rang the doorbell of the house I'd unknowingly helped purchase. Sarah answered, her eyes red-rimmed and clutching a tissue. "Dot, I'm so glad you came." She ushered me inside where Michael sat hunched over his laptop, probably researching criminal defense attorneys. "We've been up all night trying to figure out how to fix this." "The mess you created," I clarified, settling into the armchair that had once been mine. "I know I messed up," Michael said, looking up from his laptop with haggard features. "I know you're angry, but we need to work together here. That banker is trying to destroy our family. Robert Hamilton is trying to collect on a legitimate debt that you've defaulted on while committing fraud." I opened my purse and pulled out a folder Robert had given me. "Speaking of which, I have some questions about my financial liability." Sarah and Michael exchanged glances. "What kind of questions?" Sarah asked carefully. "Well, since I'm listed as co-borrower on your mortgage without my knowledge, that makes me responsible for the debt, but it also gives me certain legal rights." I opened the folder and pretended to study the documents, including the right to take possession of the collateral property to protect my interests. Michael's face went ashen. "What does that mean?" "It means, sweetheart, that if you can't pay the mortgage, I can assume the payments myself." I smiled sweetly at their horrified expressions. "Since my name is already on the loan documents, I can take ownership of the house to prevent foreclosure." "You can't do that," Sarah whispered. "Actually, I can. And given that I've been subsidizing your mortgage payments anyway, it wouldn't change much financially for me. I leaned back in my chair. The only difference would be that you'd need to find somewhere else to live. Michael shot to his feet. Mom, you can't throw us out of our home. Your home? I raised an eyebrow. The home I unknowingly co-signed for? The home I've been supporting while you lied to federal banking authorities about my mental competence? Sarah started crying in earnest, but I'd seen this performance too many times to be moved. However, there is an alternative, I continued. Mr. Hamilton mentioned that the bank would consider dropping criminal charges under certain conditions. What conditions? Michael asked desperately. I pulled out another document. Full financial restitution, not just the missed mortgage payments, but penalties, legal fees, and compensation for fraud damages. I scanned the numbers Robert had calculated. Total comes to $67,000. We don't have that kind of money, Sarah sobbed. No, but I do. I let that hang in the air. I could pay it, save you from federal prison, keep the house, make this all disappear. Hope flickered in their eyes. You would do that? For a price? I pulled out the final document. A formal rental agreement, notarized and legally binding. I pay off your debt and assume full ownership of this house. You can continue living here as my tenants. Market rate rent, 1-year lease, with option to purchase back your equity at fair market value. Sarah leaned forward to read the document. These rent payments, they're higher than our mortgage was. Yes, market rate for a house this size in this neighborhood. I folded my hands. Of course, you're welcome to find somewhere else if you think you can do better. And if we can't make the rent? Michael's voice was barely audible. Standard eviction procedures apply, though I'd be more patient than most landlords, given our relationship. I paused, assuming our relationship survives this experience. You're blackmailing us, Sarah said quietly. I'm offering you a way out of federal prison and foreclosure. I kept my voice pleasant. The alternative is watching Mr. Hamilton proceed with criminal charges while I exercise my co-signer rights anyway. Same outcome for you, but with the added bonus of Michael having a felony record. The grandfather clock in the corner, another gift from me, ticked away the seconds of their decision time. There's something else, I said, opening my purse again. I had an interesting conversation with Mr. Hamilton about the bank's investigation. Michael went pale. What investigation? When banks discover fraud, they're required to review all related accounts. So the team has been examining your complete financial history with Regional Southwest. I pulled out a printed report. Turns out this isn't the first time you've been creative with documentation. Sarah grabbed Michael's arm. What is she talking about? Your business line of credit application from 18 months ago? The one where you claimed I was a business partner contributing startup capital? I watched Michael's stricken expression. Except, I never contributed any startup capital. You used my bank statements showing the mortgage assistance as proof of business investment. Oh, God, Sarah whispered. 2 separate incidents of fraud involving the same victim. The prosecutor says that establishes a pattern of criminal behavior, makes plea bargaining much more difficult. I refolded the report. Unless, of course, the victim testifies that she was a willing participant who simply misunderstood the arrangements. Michael's hands were shaking. What do you want, Mom? I looked around the room at the life they'd built with my money, furnished with my gifts, secured with my unknowing signature. I want what I've always wanted, Michael. I want to be treated with respect. I want honesty. And I want my family to stop seeing me as their personal bank account. And if we sign this agreement, then Mr. Hamilton receives a letter from me stating that all financial arrangements were made with my full knowledge and consent. The investigation closes, the criminal charges disappear, and we start over with clear understanding of everyone's role. Sarah was reading the rental agreement again, probably calculating exactly how trapped they were. This is insane. You're our family, not our landlord. Sarah, dear, I said, standing to leave. You made that choice when you decided I was too much of a burden to pick up from the hospital. 3 days later, I met Robert for coffee at a small bistro downtown. He was already waiting, looking relaxed as he scrolled through his phone. Good morning, Dot, he said, standing to greet me with a brief, warm kiss on the cheek. You look remarkably well for someone who supposedly requires round-the-clock care. I laughed, sliding into the chair across from him. Amazing what dropping fraudulent family members will do for your health. I accepted the coffee he'd ordered. Any word from Michael's attorney? 3 calls yesterday begging for meetings to discuss resolution options. Robert's smile was satisfied. Apparently your rental agreement was quite motivating. They signed it? This morning. Notarized and filed with the county clerk's office. You are now officially their landlord. He raised his coffee cup. Congratulations on your new investment property. I should have felt triumphant, but something nagged at me. Robert, I said slowly, can I ask you something personal? Of course. How did you know it was me? I mean, Dorothy Parker is a fairly common name, and Sullivan isn't exactly unique. Robert set down his cup carefully. Your address history in the credit report. You lived on Maple Street in Millfield, Ohio, until 1982. My heart stopped. You lived on Oak Street, 3 blocks away. His smile was tender. I drove past your house for months after you married Dante, hoping to catch a glimpse of you. I memorized that address 45 years ago. I can't believe we found each other again, I whispered, reaching across the table to touch his hand. I can't believe I almost missed you. Robert's fingers intertwined with mine. If Michael had been honest with his loan application, if he hadn't committed fraud, our paths never would have crossed. So in a twisted way, I should thank my son for lying to federal banking authorities? I prefer to think of it as destiny finding a way. Robert's eyes were warm with the same tenderness I remembered from our youth, though I admit the circumstances are less romantic than I might have hoped. We spent the next hour talking about our lost years. Robert had married his college girlfriend in 1983, divorced 15 years later when they realized they'd never really been happy. No children. His ex-wife hadn't wanted them, and he'd convinced himself he didn't either. I think I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid that loving children would somehow betray what we'd had. Ridiculous, but there it is. I told him about Dante, a good man who'd given me stability and 2 children, but never the passionate love I'd shared with Bobby Hamilton in the summer of 1980. About raising Michael and his sister Jennifer, about losing Dante to cancer 5 years ago, about the slow realization that my children saw me as a responsibility rather than a person. Jennifer lives in Seattle, I explained. We talk monthly, but she has her own life. She never asks for money, never needs favors, just distant but respectful. And Michael was my baby, my charming, irresponsible baby who I kept enabling because I couldn't bear to let him fail. I sighed. I suppose I created this situation as much as he did. No. Robert's voice was firm. You loved your son. He chose to exploit that love. There's a difference. My phone buzzed with a text message. Michael's name appeared on the screen. Mom, can we talk? I've been thinking about everything you said and I want to make this right. Not just the rental agreement, everything. I want to be the son you deserve. I showed the message to Robert, who read it with raised eyebrows. What do you think? I asked. I think he's had 3 days to realize that federal prison isn't an attractive option. Robert's expression was thoughtful. But people can change, Dot. Sometimes a crisis forces growth that nothing else could accomplish. Should I respond? That depends. Are you ready to find out if your son is capable of genuine remorse, or if this is just another manipulation? I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, Come to my apartment tomorrow at 7 p.m. Come alone. We'll talk. The next evening, Michael arrived at my door carrying a manila envelope and wearing an expression I hadn't seen since he was 12 years old and had broken my favorite vase. Hi, Mom. His voice was subdued, respectful in a way it hadn't been for years. Come in. I gestured to the living room Robert had helped me redecorate over the weekend. Can I get you something to drink? Just water, please. He sat carefully on the edge of my sofa, the envelope clutched in his hands. When I returned with his water, he looked up at me with eyes that were genuinely remorseful. I owe you an apology that's bigger than words can express, he began. What I did, lying to the bank, forging medical records, putting your financial security at risk, it was criminal, literally criminal. And the worst part is that I justified it by telling myself I was protecting you from stress. I said nothing, waiting. But the truth is, I was protecting myself from failure, from having to face that my business wasn't as successful as I claimed, from admitting to Sarah that I couldn't provide the life I'd promised her. His voice cracked. And I used your love as a shield against consequences I should have faced myself. What's in the envelope, Michael? He handed it to me with shaking hands. A cashier's check for $67,000, the exact amount you paid to cover my restitution. I stared at the check. Where did this money come from? I sold my business. At a loss. But it was enough. He took a shaky breath. I also spoke to a counselor about my financial dishonesty. Apparently it's more common than I thought. People who lie about money to avoid disappointing their families. And Sarah is furious with me, as she should be. We're in marriage counseling, trying to figure out if we can rebuild trust. He met my eyes, just like I'm hoping we can rebuild trust. I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Accountability, growth, the possibility of change. The rental agreement stands, I said firmly. You'll pay market rate rent, and you'll earn back the right to call this house yours. I understand. But, I continued, I'm willing to discuss a path back to family. Real family, built on honesty and mutual respect. Relief flooded his features. Thank you, Mom. I won't waste this chance. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen, the kitchen of the house I now owned, preparing Thanksgiving dinner. The rental arrangement had worked better than anyone expected. Michael and Sarah had become respectful tenants, prompt with payments and considerate of boundaries. More importantly, they'd become honest family members. Robert was in the living room, teaching my 7-year-old granddaughter Emma to play chess, while 9-year-old Jake showed him something on his tablet. My grandchildren had taken to him immediately, drawn to his endless patience and gentle humor. The doorbell rang, and I wiped my hands before answering. Michael stood on the porch holding a bottle of wine and wearing a genuine smile. "Happy Thanksgiving, Mom," he said, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely grateful to see me. "Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart." I hugged him, noting how he held on a little longer than usual. "This is for you," he said, handing me an envelope. Early Christmas present. Inside was a contract, a purchase agreement for the house, fair market value, with a down payment that represented 2 years of faithful rent payments and responsible financial behavior. "Michael, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." His voice was steady. "I want to earn this house back the right way. I want my children to see their father as someone who keeps his word and takes responsibility for his actions." I looked past him to where Sarah was helping the children out of the car, saw her wave at me with genuine warmth. She'd surprised me over the past months, revealing a backbone I hadn't known existed. Once she'd stopped covering for Michael's lies, she'd become a woman I actually respected. "We'll discuss it after the holidays," I said, linking my arm through my son's. "Robert's been looking forward to meeting your family properly." As my family gathered around my table, in my house, by my rules, with my chosen partner at my side, I thought about the girl who'd waited at that train station 45 years ago. She couldn't have imagined this life, but I think she would have been proud of how the story was turning out. "You know," Robert said later that evening as we cleaned dishes together, "when I decided to investigate your son's loan application personally, I never imagined it would lead to this." "Fate has a sense of humor," I agreed, handing him a wine glass to dry. "Though I still think you're slightly crazy for driving an Uber on weekends." Robert laughed. "Regional bank managers don't make as much money as people think, and I like meeting people, hearing their stories." He set the glass down and turned to face me. "That day, when I saw your pickup request and recognized the name, I knew I had to be the one to drive you. You could have just called me." And said what? "Hi, Dorothy. This is the boy who was supposed to marry you 45 years ago. And by the way, your son is committing fraud." Robert shook his head. "I needed to see you first, to know if you were happy, if you'd had a good life without me." "And what did you conclude?" "That you were lonely, that your family was taking advantage of your generosity, and that you were still the strongest, most beautiful woman I'd ever known." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "Which brings me to something I've been wanting to ask you." My heart stopped. "Bobby, I know we're not kids anymore. I know we've both lived entire lives since we last saw each other, but I also know that some things are worth waiting for." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "Dorothy Sullivan Parker, will you marry me?" I stared at the ring through tears of joy. "Are you sure? I come with complicated family, rental properties, and a granddaughter who cheats at chess. I come with no family at all. a modest savings account, and an unfortunate tendency to work too much. Robert's smile was radiant. I think we balance each other out perfectly. Then yes, I whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about all the paths that had led us back to each other. Michael's fraud had been terrible, painful, destructive, but it had also been the thread that wove our lives back together. There's something else, Robert said, pulling me into his arms. I spoke to my supervisor about taking early retirement. If you're interested, I'd like to travel with you. See some of the places we talked about visiting when we were 20. What about Michael and Sarah? The grandchildren? Will always be part of our lives. But Dot, we've waited 45 years for our second chance. I don't want to waste another day. I looked around my kitchen, thought about the family gathering we'd just hosted, the respect I'd earned, the love I'd found again. For years I'd felt invisible, taken for granted, useful only for the financial support I could provide. Now I was a woman who owned property, commanded respect, and was loved for exactly who I was. A woman who'd learned to value herself enough to demand that others value her too. When do we leave? I asked. Robert's laugh was pure joy. How about tomorrow? I know a little place in San Francisco where two old lovers could start their new life together. As we stood in my kitchen, holding each other and planning our future, I realized that sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply refusing to be invisible anymore, demanding the respect you deserve, and being brave enough to embrace the love you thought you'd lost forever. The girl who'd waited at that train station in 1980 had finally gotten her happy ending. It was just 45 years later than planned. After all, the best stories are the ones where the heroine saves herself and gets the boy in the end. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.